Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News this Tuesday, the 23rd day of September, 2025. And in the headlines at this later hour, we have some very important stories that happened at the United Nations today we wanted to bring to you. So we're doing our second edition of Breaking News. So here goes. Donald Trump blasts the United Nations for funding an assault on Western countries and borders with mass migration. This is a Breitbart story. Then from the Epoch Times, Trump says Ukraine can win back all territory lost to Russia. And he also said NATO is okay to shoot down any Russian plane that goes into NATO territory, which is fascinating. And also, finally, we've got Qatar, Jordan, both denounced Netanyahu as a warmonger, a regional threat. But Indonesia, on the other hand, the largest Muslim country in the world, says Shalom. This is from the Times of Israel. That was a welcome announcement from Indonesia. So let's look at these stories because a lot happened today at the UN. Headline number one, Trump blasts the United Nations for funding an assault on Western countries and borders with mass migration. And that's what he said at the annual convention on Tuesday today. In his address, the president accused weak Western nations of destroying their own countries through mass migration, with the UN playing a central role. The number one political issue of our time is the crisis of uncontrolled migration, he exclaimed. Your countries are being ruined, he said. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders. The president then laid out the material support that the United Nations gave to these invading illegals who flooded borders by the hundreds of millions all across the world. He said in 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support migrants journeying into the United States. The president said from the podium. The UN also provided food, shelter, transportation, and debit cards to illegal aliens on the way to infiltrate our southern border. What took place is totally unacceptable. The UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them and not finance them, he continues. In the United States, we reject the idea that mass numbers of people from foreign lands can be permitted to travel halfway around the world, trample our borders, violate our sovereignty, cause unmitigated crime, and deplete our social safety nets. We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stance in defense of their citizens as well. He then went on to say, Europe is in serious trouble. They've been invaded by a force of illegal aliens like nobody's ever seen before. And he said something that's so true here. It's not sustainable. He said of the lack of efforts by Western governments to stop the invasion of their borders. And because they choose to be politically correct, they're doing just absolutely nothing about it. Trump lamented how the city of London has been so changed by the terrible, terrible Mayor Sadiq Khan. Now they want to go to Sharia law. He warned that it will be the death of Europe if those countries don't start controlling their borders. He warned Western nations to be more vigilant over immigration and said migrants constantly break Western laws. They lodge false asylum claims or claimed refugee status for illegitimate reasons. They should be, in many cases, immediately sent home. The president pointed out that Western nations are very compassionate and certainly want to help less stable regions of the world fix their problems, but we have to solve the problems that we have to solve in their countries. But we have to solve the problems that we have to solve it in their countries, not to create new problems in our countries. In other words, they need to solve it in their own countries, not bring them to us for us to solve the problem. Trump noted in 2024, almost 50% of inmates in German prisons were foreign nationals. That's something. 50% of the inmates in German prisons were foreign nationals or migrants. In Austria, the number was 53% of the people in prisons who were migrants. In Greece, the number 54%. And in Switzerland, 72% of the people in prisons are from outside of Switzerland. When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness with crime, it's time to end the failed experiment of open borders, he declared. Your countries are going to hell. Well, Donald Trump sure tells it like it is, doesn't he? Now, sadly, Europe is highly likely to change with their leftist leanings. And it's sad because they're basically destroying themselves, and that's what we're seeing. And also, too, it's setting the stage for a ruler to come and take charge of Europe and bring it back to some sort of sanity. And sadly, though, that'll be the final antichrist, as the Bible talks about, coming at the time of the end, who will have answers for all these problems and seemingly bring about a time of peace. for the world, and particularly in this region. We write about this in our book, The Final Antichrist, The Coming Caesar. It's a free download from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible prophecy. So please take advantage of it as we talk about what he does when he gets on the scene. Now, in another subject, some really surprising statements. Trump says Ukraine can win back all territory lost to Russia. This is from the Epoch Times. I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of the Ukraine back in its original form, he wrote. He said on September 23rd that Ukraine should go on the offensive against Russia and reclaim all occupied territories. After getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win, all capital letters, all of the Ukraine back in its original form. He wrote this post on Truth Social. The president then said, with the backing from Europe and NATO and enough time and patience, it is very much an option for Ukraine to drive Russian forces out and restore its borders. Interesting to go back to the original borders. He thinks Ukraine can do that. Why not? He wrote. Russia's been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. It's in fact very much making look like what they are, a paper tiger. Uh, Trump then went on to say Russia's faltering economy, shortages at home, and growing public discontent could tip the balance further in Ukraine's favor. He described Ukraine as having a great spirit and growing stronger as the war drags on, while warning that the Russian leader Vladimir Putin faces big, all uppercase letters, big economic trouble. This is the time for Ukraine to act, Trump wrote, noting that he wishes both countries well, that the United States will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. The Kremlin, of course, did not reply to any requests for comment by publication time. Wonder what they will say when it comes time. Now, for months, as we know, Donald Trump has tried to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine, urging the leaders of the two warring nations to hammer out some type of diplomatic settlement and end the bloodshed. However, those efforts have yielded few results, and Trump's latest comments signal recognition that talks with Putin have gone nowhere and that only battlefield pressure will decide the war. We were wondering if it was going to get to that. Well, that's where he's at now. Trump's message came shortly after he met with Ukrainian President Zelensky on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Reacting to the post, Zelensky told reporters that Trump is a game changer for Ukraine. Earlier, Trump answered questions from reporters while sitting alongside Zelensky. A reporter asked the U.S. President directly whether he believes that a NATO nation should shoot down a Russian aircraft that enters its airspace, to which Trump replied, "Yes, I do." Let's read that again. If Russian plane, Russian aircraft, or drone or whatever enters NATO airspace, should they shoot it down? And he said, yeah, I think they should. Okay. On September 23rd, also, NATO warned Russia that the alliance would use all necessary military and non-military tools to defend itself as it condemned Kremlin forces for violating Estonian airspace, which the alliance described as a pattern of increasingly irresponsible behavior, close quote. Now, these are very, very strong words from the president. He's obviously fed up with Vladimir Putin, has decided to support Ukraine in its effort to gain back the lost territory. Going to be really interesting to see what happens next. All right, let's shift gears now. We've got Qatar, Jordan, and Indonesia all speaking at the UN, and it's interesting to see how the three countries spoke differently. This is from the Times of Israel. Qatar, Jordan denounced Netanyahu as a warmonger. Well, that's what we expected as a regional threat. But Indonesia actually says shalom to Israel. Interesting. All right. They visit our country and plot to attack it, wails the emir. That's the emir of Kuwait. As Abdullah warns, Greater Israel would involve blatant violation of the sovereignty of Israel's neighbors. But on the other hand, Indonesia's leader said Israel's security must be respected. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Al Thani said Tuesday that Israel had chosen war over the return of its remaining 48 hostages and that its treacherous September 9th attack on the Hamas leadership in Doha was an attempt to derail the Qatar-mediated Gaza hostage ceasefire talks. In his address to the UN General Assembly in New York, Al Thani accused Israel of genocide in Gaza and said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sees the Gaza war as an opportunity to expand settlements. Remember, this is supposed to be the honest broker here, Qatar, and this is what he thinks of Israel and what he thinks is going on. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is a uber anti-Semite, and the leaders of Jordan and Turkey also condemned Israel over its conduct in Gaza, with Jordan's King Abdullah devoting almost his entire address to a denunciation of the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, which he said was not a partner for peace, and whose greater Israel calls threaten the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Israel's neighbors. Again, nothing new here with Jordan, with Guterres, with everybody else, Jordan, Turkey. They're all saying the same thing. They're all singing from the same hymn book. Now, in sharp contrast, the president of Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim nation, which has no formal relations with Israel, said the world must respect Israel's right to security and ended his speech with the Hebrew benediction, Shalom. Addressing the strike, Qatar's emir slammed the violation of the Gulf state's sovereignty and reiterated his denunciation of Israel's rogue act of state terrorism, accusing the Israel of a policy of political assassinations. And then he goes on and say it's difficult to cooperate with such a mentality that does not respect the most minimal standards of cooperation. It is impossible. Now, the leader of Kuwait forgot to mention, or Qatar, excuse me, the leader of Qatar forgot to mention that Qatar is happily housing the terrorists who committed the atrocities of October 7, 2023, the atrocities to which Israel is responding. His hypocrisy is off the charts. In other words, talking Israel being a warmonger, blaming Israel for this and that. All the time he's housing, feeding, and protecting these leaders of Hamas who, not only instigated the war, but keep it going and want to keep it going. So it's refreshing to hear also the more moderate tone of Indonesia. It is sad that more Muslim countries do not follow their lead. So all in all, the main surprise today from the UN is Trump's unqualified support for Ukraine and giving the green light for NATO to shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter its airspace. This will certainly cause things to heat up. Stay tuned. All right, that's our latest edition of Breaking News. We thought we'd bring you the second one today because of these stories that came from the UN, particularly what Donald Trump said about Ukraine, and then how he chastised the Europe in particular for their ridiculous migrant policy that's causing more than half, isn't it amazing? More than half the people in their jails are migrants in these countries. Is anybody surprised? I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow with another edition of Breaking News. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.